Okay, planning board, we are live. We are recording. Phone lines will remain off. Go for it.
Very well. Thank you all and welcome to the meeting of the Town of East Hampton Planning Board for March 15th, 2023. We have a few matters on for work session and a couple of matters in the regular meeting, some resolutions. Let me just start with a personal thank you to everybody in the planning department and the board here for your good wishes, and also to those members of the public who actually did send me good wishes as well. It's very good to be back among you in any shape, manner, or form, but particularly here live and in person. So thank you very much. We've got the Franzetti matter, which is that's Tina is covering that for the planning department. Ian's got it for the board, and he's the applicant. So Waylon, you're here for that.
Okay, just give me a second. I'm going to open up. Okay, this is in relation to the Franzetti subdivision waiver. The application is to subdivide an existing 1.23 acre lot into two parcels, and I'll show the map here. The issues for discussion. At a May 2022 planning board meeting, the applicant had agreed to submit a phase 1A archaeological study. Subsequent to this, a 2018 historical research report and ground penetrating radar study were submitted. There was a conclusion that those tools weren't sufficient to determine if there was potential Native American burials on site. This is adjacent to a Native American burial grounds. You can see it right here in the central area of the site plan. So the purpose of this review today is to review the phase 1B archaeological survey work plan, which the applicant has submitted. It proposes a series of test pits to evaluate potential archaeological remains that may be on site. The 1B study proposes to excavate 8 test trenches, and limiting those trenches to the areas where disturbance is proposed or would be expected as a result of the subdivision and subsequent construction. So the planning department has reviewed the phase 1B and offers the following comments. We understand that a backhoe is going to be the method for excavation to evaluate the test trenches. We would just like to understand that the applicant and their professional archaeologists confirm that's a acceptable and safe method when there's sensitive materials that could be located near the ground surface. The phase 1B did indicate that the backhoe operations would be conducted under the guidance of an archaeologist. It wasn't clear to me if the archaeologist will be on site to supervise all the operations, so we'd like those clarifications. We understand based on the work plan that there's no test trends proposed in the vicinity of a new wastewater system to be located here on the site plan. The applicant had reported that there was a horse buried in that location. We just want to make sure that as we go forward that the horse will be exhumed, or that if there's an alternate location for the sanitary system, it gets studied here. You know, depending on the findings, archaeological study could be very important throughout the whole site. So we'd like that confirmation. We noted in the phase 1B that the applicant has offered to coordinate with the Montauk Indian Nation chief if there's burials, potential burials identified, and we agree that that's important to maintain that close coordination. So we thought that was good in the work plan. The phase 1B indicated that if artifacts are located that are not burials, but just cultural artifacts, that they would be exposed and recorded, and that they would share the findings with the planning department. We suggest that a phase 1 report that just contains a summary of the findings and the archaeologist's recommendations for next steps is submitted, and that's the best way we think to coordinate with the planning department. We also think that it's important for the chief of the Montauk Nation to stay in the loop regarding those if they are located. And then the last thing, this map here shows where the test trenches are being located. There's large expanses of the site that are not being evaluated. We offer that it may be appropriate to consider covenants and restrictions regarding future excavation on that site should sensitivities be located during this study. That concludes our comments on the Phase 1B work plan. We did just want to reference that there were several comments made at a May 11th, 2022 planning board meeting, and there was a memo from the planning department. There was several issues discussed there, key among them the magnitude of the lot variance required from the zoning board. So recommending, noticing that the results of this study could influence future site development potential. I think it makes good sense to evaluate it first and then move forward with the ZBA conversation. But we did just want to remind everyone that there are a lot of issues that still need to be evaluated in ZBA approval if they needed here.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Mr. Chairman, I knew you were absent for a meeting or so. I didn't realize that you had, that was a more important reason. I'm glad to see you back.
Thank you very much. I should have thanked Ian because Ian did in my absence. I was watching. He did a magnificent job. So thank you.
Glad to see everybody tonight. So I am the attorney, Richard Whalen from Whalen Filer PLLC, the attorney for the applicant who is Nora Franzetti. I'm here tonight with Paul Meehan, I think I got that right, from Richard Grubb Associates. Paul will be the project archaeologist. We actually, when Nora started this project, and I'll describe the project in a moment, Nora started, actually, we were using Allison McGovern as the archaeologist. Allison went to Richard Grubb Associates, but she's since taken the position with FEMA. So Allison's no longer directly involved, but so Paul has taken over. So I don't think you've ever met him before. This is your first time. So the application was just, as Tina just explained, is a proposal to subdivide the existing property. You obviously have the map at the back of your drawing. The blue line indicates the area that's owned by Nora Franzetti, and you can see the proposed lot line. The purpose of the application, the purpose of the subdivision is to create a second lot. Right now, Tina lives in the house on the property with her adult daughter and her husband, her daughter's husband, and at least one child. I believe it's one child. The property was originally two lots, and again, if you look at the map and see what we're proposing, those were the original two lots. And I think the late 1990s, for reasons unknown to me, Nora and her prior husband merged the property voluntarily. I do not know why they did that. It's not like they went ahead and built a bigger house straddling the property line, or it just gave up a second lot. So, given the family situation, we would like to recreate that. So the issue before you tonight is the archaeology, obviously. What I want to noted that this is something that the applicant proposed. We are adjacent to the often called the East Lake Drive Indian Cemetery, or the Indian Field Indian Cemetery. These are all Native American burials. We believe that all the burials are within the actual cemetery bounds, it's a fairly large graveyard, but there's always the possibility of an anomaly. So we've always understood that. And that's why even before we came to you, we had engaged Stony Brook years ago to do subsurface testing with ground penetrating radar. And they actually didn't do much on our property. They tested it within the cemetery itself, and they got inconclusive results. So that really led us, that was kind of a dead end. But it's always been the applicant's intention to do an investigation so we don't get surprised. I think that's the right thing to do. So I'm going to have Paul come up. Most of the questions I think raised by the planning department are of a technical nature, and I think Paul is best suited to answer those. Thank you.
Paul McKeon, Director of Archaeology, Richard Grubb Associates. Thank you for reviewing, the Phase 1B archaeological work plan. And as you can see, we proposed the trenches, within the areas that are proposed for ground disturbance that have the greatest potential for there to be excavations earth moving and things like that associated with the, with the proposed development. And just, just really to kind of hone in on the questions, yes, all work on site will be done under the oversight of a professional archaeologist. It won't necessarily be me on site, but it'll be one of my colleagues. And yeah, I mean, this site will be treated with the with the utmost care. With a question was raised about about using a backhoe, and so the thing with the backhoe is that we propose to to have a steel blade placed on the on the bucket, like where the teeth are, in order to kind of gradually peel off the soil carefully, and so that'll be done under the oversight of an archaeologist. And we also anticipate that there'll be either one or two other archaeologists present as well to help clean off the subsoil surface in order to carefully examine the subsoil surface for the presence of potential features or interments. Basically, I know we did indicate in our phase 1B work plan that we may sample potential features that aren't believed to be possible burials, but we won't do that in acknowledgement of your comment. What we'll do is we'll just remove the topsoil, clean out the surface, see if there's any potential features, and then what we'll do is we'll map them within each trench, and then prepare a report for submission for your review, and then the decision can be made then about whether to sample or not. I think oh yeah, and with respect to the to the horse remains, I don't think that's going to preclude the siting of the wastewater treatment facilities on site. I think they know pretty much where the horse is, and I think it probably can be avoided. But that's obviously that's to be determined. But I think really that's and obviously we will maintain close coordination with Chief Robert Farrow over the course of the investigations. And I think that's really all I have, unless there's any additional questions.
We'll discuss it when we question.
I think that, what we're here to talk about today is mostly the archaeological plan. And I think that I agree with all of the planning department's comments, and it sounds like the applicant and archaeologist does as well. So I guess just to quickly go through the highlights, like I said, I agree with everything that the planning department said. I'm okay with the backhoe as described under the supervision of an archaeologist, which is also the second question. As long as the septic system is going to be in the planned place and you're planning on investigating that area as well and nothing changes, I think that's been explained satisfactorily. And then I think the idea, I do think that everybody knows here, the applicant has recognized that, what we get back in this phase 1, in this part of the investigation might lead to some other things that we will want to do on this property. But I think let's see what comes back in your report. Obviously, it's a sensitive area, and it's a very important part of this application. But as I said, I think the planning department team did a great job highlighting the important features. You guys seem to be totally in agreement. So we'll wait to hear you come back and see what you find. Just to speak generally on the application, all of the things we talked about before in terms of the lot area variance, I think, it's significant, but I understand why you want to wrap up the archaeology first to make sure that there's nothing that comes up. I think we discussed at the previous meeting, but just want to make sure that's still on everyone's radar.
Does anyone have anything they want to add to this?
a question for Rick, I guess. So I'm just thinking, I'm just wondering if you all considered say a detached affordable unit on one lot and maybe adding this to the burial ground, like, there's a sale. So you could have a CPF purchase of an addition to the cemetery. And then put, now we allow a detached affordable home.
Well, that's a good question. I should point out that when this application was started and initiated, it's only in the last year that the town has talked seriously and actually having rules that would make it really possible to have a detached building for affordable housing purposes. So this is something I will be discussing with my client.
Okay.
Again, we started the application. That was not a realistic option. In terms of a sale of part of the property, I would say, first of all, let's just see what happens with the archaeological investigation. I don't know that the town necessarily will want to add on to that unless they have reason to believe, there are burials that are outside the existing cemetery area. So, I could only speculate on that issue.
The only thing I would add is I'm very glad that there'll be an involvement of I'm talking Indian Nation. I think that's really important in this application. So I don't, and they'll have somebody on site, if not the chief himself, and representative. That's the plan.
Yeah, actually, I should point out that actually when Stony Brook did the ground penetrating radar work, and this is 4 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. Chief Farrow was actually there that day. I went out and he was present.
Yeah, no, I mean, to the extent that there may be a disturbance or something that comes close to being a disturbance, it's very, very important that he or his representatives be there. So, okay, then have at it and let us know what turns up. Do we need a resolution on this?
Say it's approved?
Do we need a resolution on this?
Oh, what type of resolution are you looking for?
Just to, before we actually start working on something, it might be just a letter.
I think we'll probably send you a letter based on these
Yeah,
comments.
okay, just approving that so that we know that that RGA can go ahead and start work.
Jody, the letter can indicate that?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine with us.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Cucci, the application on Queens Lane. And again, that's Tina. You've got that, and the applicant, Mr. Whalen.
Thank you. This application is for a site plan special permit. It is to allow for a fenced-in gravel-based facility for storage of portable sanitary units, supplies, and vehicles on a parcel containing a legally pre-existing non-conforming single-family residence located in the CI district. The majority of the property is cleared. And the other part of the proposal is to provide access to this new storage area through the adjoining property to the north, 76 Queens Lane, through a property also owned by the applicants and family. The planning department issued a memo in November of 2022 for this application. However, the project adjourned before it was discussed with the board fully. So the following memo reiterates some of the comments from that presentation of that memo that were not addressed in the latest submission. New information since the last review with the planning board is that in a resolution dated August 2022, the ZBA granted the necessary relief to allow another use to be added to the CI parcel. So, and they added it as a second use on the property as a commercial use. So now both uses that are proposed for the property are legal, both the one-story single family home and the storage area for the portable sanitary units. Regarding neighboring lot access, the applicant is proposing to provide access to the project site, which is 74 Queens Lane, via 76 Queens Lane. via what they called a grant of general undefined access. You can see the site plans up here, and it's just showing general undefined access easement, kind of applying to the entire site with a line going through that the text of the easement refers to as a transit line. Regarding this, we note that the ZBA approved a plan that I'm now showing on the screen that looked different in August. And this had showed more of a traditional way we're used to seeing easements on properties, providing for, 20 feet or so at the entrance for truck navigation and then direct line to the 74 Queens Lane site. The planning department recommends that the planning board require the applicant revert to the manner in which the easement was depicted on the plan approved by the ZBA. The reasons for this are that we're unaware of similar access arrangements that serve as a precedent for this type of approach. And we're also concerned that this is not consistent with good planning, in that it could potentially cause confusion with respect to the encumbrance on the property in the future. This type of arrangement showing the access and its extent very clearly, allows it to be shown clearly on future site plans and surveys, as it should be in perpetuity. The other item regarding 76 Queens Lane is that, as previously suggested, the applicant should submit a separate site plan for 76 Queens Lane. This is necessary to legalize the access arrangement that the applicant is proposing to facilitate access to the 74 Queens Lane site. Regarding 76 Queens Lane, the next part of the memo just notes that Dayton Lane, which is abandoned, was supposed to remain vegetated, and it has been mostly cleared of naturally occurring vegetation, and it's going to have to remain cleared now to facilitate the continued and formalized access to the 74 Queens Lane site. But the January 2020 site plan that shows part of 76 Queens Lane does show some vegetation that is proposed. 20 white pines are going to be provided to screen that property from views of Queens Lane. That is acceptable and fulfills a specific requirement of an approval for 76 Queens Lane that's on file. The next item I'd like to discuss is the sanitary system. In the November 2022 planning memo, it was reviewed that although the residence on 74 Queens Lane is proposed to remain the same, the addition of the use is likely going to require a sanitary system upgrade for that site. There's a town code citation in the memo that basically says when you're adding a use that increases the parking requirements on the site, a sanitary system upgrade is required. And the addition of this use does actually increase the parking. So the planning department finds that the use triggers the need for a sanitary upgrade, but the planning board may also wish to seek a determination from the building inspector if there's any ambiguity about this for them. Regarding drainage and paving, we just note that the site plan is showing areas for trailer and truck storage, as well as those for sanitary unit storage. Wasn't clear where the gravel area extended to. There's some calculations here. It wasn't clearly noted on the plan. We would just like that clarified. And then, so in conclusion, the ZBA has authorized the second use on Queens Lane for the commercial use and for the single family home to remain. The issues that remain to be discussed are the manner in which the access easement is shown on the 76 Queens Lane property, the submission of the 76 Queens Lane site plan, and the need for a sanitary system upgrade on 74 Queens Lane. That's it.
Again, good evening, Richard Whalen from Whalen Filer PLC on behalf of the applicant, who is Joe Cucci. So I'll say at the outset, I do have problems with several aspects of the planning department memo, and I'll get to those. First of all, there was apparently a memo prepared in November of 2022. We never saw that, just to note that in the record. We've never been privy to that memo. I think the application, there may have been a work session scheduled at which we asked for an adjournment, and I don't remember why. Jeff Fryrush probably would have asked for that, but we have never seen that memo, just to be clear. The nature, so to back up for a second, we had to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals because the code has what I would consider a quirk. If you're in a commercial zoning district, but you have a pre-existing use, one pre-existing use, and it's residential, even though residences are a non-conforming use in the CI zone, you're only entitled to that one use. You can't have a second use. Normally, as I think you all know, on commercial industrial property, 2 commercial uses are always allowed. Here, we had to go to the zoning board to get the second use, which was a commercial use on commercial property. I personally think that should be fixed by legislation, changing the code, but nobody was moving on that, so we went to the zoning board, and the zoning board did grant the variance. They did refer to a site plan because they always refer to, there's a survey shown to them, so they refer to it. But the zoning board isn't really looking at the nature of how things are laid out. They are looking at the issue of, is a second use, in this case, a commercial use, appropriate on the property, and they found that it was. We need to go as currently proposed. Remember, the thorn in this whole, whatever bush, is that there's a residence on the property. There's a local family that lives there. The owner of the property does not want to tear the house down and evict them. So we've been trying to work around the house. You can't really get access to the back, therefore, without going through the neighboring property, because the owner owns the neighboring property. So that's a solution for us. If he didn't, either we'd have to tear the house down or we'd have to go around the right side of it or something. But, it was deemed, so he owns the neighboring property. It's a storage yard use. We can come in through there. The point of our proposed, how do we describe it? Undefined access easement, which, by the way, we did discuss, but both Jeff and I believe, discussed with Eric Shantz back in the fall of last year, was not to fix a particular location because that property might change someday. That storage yard use, maybe somebody comes in with a building permit, for a building, for a site plan application to build a building, or they do something else with it. So to keep flexibility, all we're trying to do is get through that property from Queens Lane to our property. And we've defined the point of connection on our property. I'll just walk and point. This area here, that's the transit line. Maybe not the clearest terminology, but we're trying to reach a 20-foot wide a stretch along the subject property, which is 74 Queens Lane, to reach. So all the access easement says is the owner of 76 Queens Lane, which is the storage yard, shall always allow for an easement, a vehicle and pedestrian easement through their property from Queens Lane. They can choose the point at Queens Lane to the transit line, meaning the point of juncture on our property that we need to get into our parking area. That access can change. You can change that access. If that property ever goes into site plan, you don't have to go and amend an existing access easement. You can just say, we'd like to move the access, maybe the point of access on Queens Lane may change, or the through route through the property may change based upon what the parking is. It's always burdened by that. So if somebody comes in to build on that property or change the use of that property, you are aware that they always have to have a 20-foot wide access that will connect to our property at the transit line. That provides maximum flexibility. That's why we think it's a good choice. We can always tweak the language if you or your attorneys have, issues with how we're wording it. I reread it today, probably could write a better version of it, but that's the principle. The separate site plan application is something we really don't want to do. That's opening up another application. The only issues here are how we get through that property, and secondarily, as the planner has pointed out, issues of vegetation, because more land was cleared than was supposed to. So we are proposing to revegetate that. I don't think that warrants a new site plan application, which would be a new application form, a new fee. Obviously we would rather avoid that. And then lastly, the sanitary. Now this is new, the kind of thing that annoys people, because 3 years into the application, you don't want to be hearing stuff like this. I think the planning department is wrong. I'll give you 2 reasons why. The issue is coming out of section 210 of the code, which now requires IA sanitary systems in certain cases. And it refers to site plan review under chapter 255 zoning of the town code. It says that this applies the site plan, the various things that occur under site plan, if they relate to non-residential properties, would trigger an upgrade to an IA system. The zoning code does not have a definition of a non-residential property. I don't want to be too technical here, but this is how you read code. There's no definition of non-residential property. There's a definition of residential property. We're leaving that category if we get approval here. There's a definition of commercial property. We'll enter that category if we get approval here, because we'll have commercial use. But there's no definition of non-residential property. So what do you do when you don't have a definition in the code? You use plain English, okay? In plain English, is this a non-residential property? Clearly not. It's got a residence on it. Can't say it's a non-residential property. It's got a house on it. So the rule that the planning department is referring to relates to non-residential properties, which we're not. And just secondly, to just follow up in a logical sense, the issue is upgrading an existing sanitary system. There's a house on the property that has a sanitary system. We're not changing the house at all. The new use is a storage use with no building and no on-site sanitary. So it's kind of illogical to require that we upgrade the sanitary for the house because we're introducing the storage yard use, which generates no sanitary waste on site. So that's my answer to that, both a legal one and just a logical one. We don't think that's required. And then the final thing, the site plan does have symbols for where the gravel is, but it doesn't have a legend to show that symbol. So obviously that's something we can correct easily. So we will do that.
It's a very interesting application. And I've always been sympathetic to the applicant because I thought it was important that that house remain in place because of the circumstances of people who live there, affordable housing and that whole thing. So I think we sort of, not bent over backwards, but I think we tried to accommodate the wishes of the applicant. But now these other things have come up. So I'll start with the sanitary system first. We always get a lot of cases where technically the applicant does not need to put in a sanitary system, even though other circumstances would warrant a sanitary system to be upgraded closer to surface waters, that kind of thing. In this case, I understand your point about the definition of non-residential properties. Well, non-residential property is anything that is not defined as residential property in the code. I mean, that's the way I would look at it.
As a lawyer, I disagree, but
Okay.
that's all right.
But anyway, my point there is that I think technically, and I guess we could fight this if you don't disagree, I think technically this needs to be upgraded. I think it's important that all properties upgrade to an IA system. So if there's a technical reason to upgrade, I would fight for that to be done. With regard to the other issue, I think it's too vague to just put in an undefined access. Something has got to be defined. And I agree, we can be a little more flexible than just using the site plan that was reviewed by the zoning board. And maybe we can get it closer to what you would like. I think that can maybe worked out, maybe with Eric and the other planning department members. So I'm flexible there as to doing something about that. I think a site plan for that property, and again, I feel badly that, the applicant has been very accommodative in trying to do the right thing and keep the house there for the tenants. So I don't want to impose any more hardships and unnecessary hardships. But I think, again, that you really do need a site plan review for that other property because of what we're doing here with the access and everything. So those are my opinions on it.
You're saying that there's no requirement to upgrade the septic because it's non-residential.
Right.
Why is it any more non-commercial than it's non-residential?
The language they use in chapter 210 is this is mandatory for a non-residential property. We're not a non-residential property. We have a house on the property. Let me just say one thing in response to what Lou says too. I mean, this might be a different situation if we were near surface waters. I mean, being realistic about the benefit of a low nitrogen system in this neighborhood is pretty minimal. So it's a cost to us. The environmental benefit to the town is, pretty minuscule. So here's what I would say. It's not really your call because this is a code interpretation issue. So you can refer to your council or you can refer to the building inspector for an interpretation. At the end of the day, I think you have to do one of those two things if there is, a disagreement.
So one other question. Why, is there any other example in the town that you can think of that's got a non-defined or undefined easement on any parcel in town?
There might be that didn't go through the planning process. There might be undefined easements through properties. By the way, I should point out too, when I say undefined, we defined even the width of it. In other words, there has to be at least a 20-foot wide course that you can get from the road to the subject property, and it has to be usable by up to a certain truck size, not a tractor trailer, obviously. So, when I say undefined, there are parameters in there to explain how that route has to be kept open.
Look, can you see that would be a dangerous precedent to create?
I don't think so at all. If the easement is properly worded, I don't see any danger. It'll be there in its face. You read the document and understand, that, we have a right of way to go through. The owner of the property could potentially move the right of way. The planning board, if a future site plan came out, could potentially move the right of way, as long as 74 Queens Lane has an access at least 20 foot wide that you get vehicles of a certain size with, their access is preserved.
No, I mean, on this particular site where it's all industrial all around it, and it's pretty obviously how, the direction that they take from whatever cut there would be on Queens Lane to and the phrase you use is transit line. Is that something you made up?
I made up. What I'm trying to do is you have to define the place on 74 Queens Lane to which the access must go.
All right, so
it doesn't do if they come to the front yard of the property. That doesn't help. They got to come to the.
On this particular application, this particular site, I'll grant you, it seems pretty obvious. You take the path of least resistance or the most direct line. But if this application goes forward and or is approved, I should say, and you have an undefined easement, then that idea of an undefined easement may not always be on a parcel that's this clear.
Absolutely. There may be very few cases where it would work. I'm not suggesting that this is when you do this every time you have an access easement. I just think on this property, given that 76 Queens Lane is still open, it's basically, it's not vacant in the sense that it's an approved storage yard use, and it's a very small lot, so I don't know how big a building you could build there. But if somebody comes in, somebody to build a building on it, the whole site's going to change. Mm-hmm. And,
well, right now you've got a whole bunch of different things. You got, trailers and sheds and all kinds of.
I think they removed all the sheds.
Well,
some trailers and a few vehicles.
It seems
all of which have license plates on them. I checked.
But the idea is, I guess you want it so that you can accommodate the chock-a-block nature of the parcel.
Well, I'll say this: I see it as easier because if you create a defined easement, then you may have to change it in the future. It's not the end of the world.
Trailers around. To where
they can't block
at any given moment.
Yeah, well, they always have to leave, under my theory, they always have to leave a route, a 20-foot wide accessible route out through our property. That's what we're really talking about. What's the easiest way to do that won't create problems in the future?
Yeah, and it only works because both parcels are owned by the same guy.
Pretty much, yeah.
Your client ever sells one of the parcels, there could be.
Well, the buyer takes subject to the easement.
Such as it is.
Well, in other words, he can do something else with that property, need site plan approval, so long as he doesn't prevent a 20-foot access to get in from Queens Lane to 74 Queens Lane.
Hope he has a good lawyer. I monopolize this. Does anyone else have anything that they want to question or add?
Well, I think it's I think we should have this read by Ann. I mean, not Ann, it's not Ann anymore.
No,
Joe.
Chief building inspector.
It's the chief, whoever, I'm not sure who it is.
I agree with that.
Joe.
Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, I definitely think we need determination from Joe on the sanitation.
I agree 100% with that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Everyone agree? Okay, not a referral.
And I mean, I guess if it's anybody's turn, then I will,
Yeah.
look, I do think that the access is an issue. And I think that, I get what you're trying to do is leave things open for the future. But this use on 74 is not necessarily tied to 76, right?
Right.
So,
right.
I think if we're thinking for the future, if somebody uses 74 without 76, and then that's such a vague access.
But remember though, Ian, if we do a traditional easement, 74 might, again, change its use someday and just be working independently of 76, yet they still have an easement over 76. Even if they.
Well, I'm not in
even if
favor
they
of no easement. I'm in favor of an easement, but if you want to leave yourself options for future development, then put the easement in the place that makes the most sense. But your language of a truck of this size, and it's got to be 20 foot wide, what if there's a weird turn in there? Or it's just, it's not good planning. And I frankly don't quite understand the burden because, well, maybe you can educate me or somebody else can about how hard it would be to change that easement should 76 come up for a site plan in the future.
Well, it's harder if you don't have the same owner, because then the one person might refuse to agree to amend it, which really would lock in. Now, one would think that if Joe Cucci sold 76
That's
Queens
the
Lane,
thing.
they'll negotiate about that. But remember, they'll have the easement. If you approved it, the easement will be in place. And when you sell 76, you take it subject to this easement because the planning board has fixed the easement in place.
Can I ask, so will you come up with a definite entrance for this site plan though? So maybe the easement is a little bit loosey-goosey in the language, but you are going to determine an entryway.
But what you want
from
me
one
to,
to the-
what you want me to. So you don't know what somebody might do in 76 in the future and where they might propose a building. It seems to me realistically, the reason's probably going to have to be in the southern half of the lot because it can't be the far northeast corner. You'd have to navigate the whole lot to the parking lot, right? So, but it gives you more flexibility too. That's how I see it. What I would suggest is discuss it with the attorney. We need an easement through there. We're going to give you whatever kind of easement you ultimately want. I just felt that a non-specifically defined easement gave the parties more flexibility to do something in the future with 76 Queens Lane.
Yeah, I just think that at any given time, if that's not defined, it's not fair to the other property owner. I get what you're saying. You want
Well,
flexibility.
they know it's defined as to what it has to do.
I know, but what if somebody buys 74 and the owner of 76 are two different owners, and then the owner of 76 totally changes their driveway around, which is legal by the definition, because that's just not fair.
They can't change it without going to you. They can't change any part of that. They need site planning. When they want to change the access to that parking lot, that
I
needs site
guess I
plan
just
approval.
don't understand. I don't understand the burden then. Then why not just have a defined easement that changes its location?
Because if then you change, or the current future owner changes the site development, puts a building on the site, wants to change the location of the driveway, it's going to require negotiation with the owner to the south to move or amend the existing easements.
I still believe, and of course I'm open to other opinions, and especially from council, but that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. It seems like if you're trying to preserve future development, maybe you don't have access coming straight to the middle of it. That's up to you. But it sure seems like we wouldn't be doing something that can't be undone, which is something that I hate when we do as a planning board. But I don't think that we would be doing that by saying, hey, show us where it's coming in. And then if you want to change it later, change it. But
I think the problem that you have is a logistical one more than anything, in that there's only a very limited space that you're calling transit, that that access can be had to 74 from 76, because otherwise a vehicle is going to be going straight into the residence. You've only got, 20, 30 feet of, I'm looking at it here. Where what would that be? The easternmost border of 74, where it dead ends at the southern, if that's what it is, border of 76. And you see how it goes X number of feet, maybe 20 feet or 30 feet to the east. And then it goes about 2 or 3 times that to the west, you only have the first 20 or 30 feet from where the western border of 74 hits the southern border of 76 to allow access to the commercial part of 76. You see what I'm talking about?
That's what he's calling the transit line, though.
The transit, yeah, that's what I'm saying. In all instances, that's one end of your easement. You can't not have the easement end anywhere else, because otherwise it's going straight.
Yeah, the south or southwest end of the easement is fixed.
Yeah,
It's the other side that would want flexibility to move.
whether it's,
So let me ask you a question. You guys have to tell me, do you want a new site plan application in 76? Well, let me just tell you, because if you tell me that you do, I might go back to the client. I might say, you know what, we should change that driveway right now. Why not move the driveway further south? Then our distance to get into the subject property is much less.
you're only cutting off a small part of the
Yeah,
triangle.
in other words, instead of going
More here, you're saying.
there, maybe we just want to go in as short as possible.
Why not? Would you agree to an easement from that location, from that point?
Probably easier at that point.
How planning feels about that. Yeah.
Well, yeah. That's part of the reason why you would require a site plan on that property to the north. Just looking at it right now, first of all, if you move the access further to the south, you're going to put it opposite the intersection of Stewart's Lane and Cheryl Foster's Path. If you move it further to the north, you'll see that, well, Tina, if you can zoom out a little bit, you'll see it'll put it closer to the access on the property to the north on the western side of the property. It would also put it opposite the property to the east, which isn't necessarily the end of the world. But, if you look at that very small constrained lot that is 74 Queens Lane, the access was intentionally put in the middle of that triangular shaped lot because it really seems to be the most appropriate location. But that being said, that's why you have a site plan on a property if you're going to be providing cross access, across that property, is to work out things like this. It's not why, that's why you don't just set an easement that's undefined on a property and then say, well, we'll figure it out later. The applicant, if this property, the subject property, was going to be providing access from Queens Lane, where it fronts on Queens Lane entirely on their own property, then that's fine. Obviously you don't need to involve the property to the north, but they're asking for cross access across that property. It serves to all logical reason that you would look at a site plan on that, you would lay out that access in a defined manner because the properties may change hands, they might not be under the same ownership, and you would define where the appropriate access point is, both from Queens Lane, where appropriate access across that property to the north would be across that property, and then where the appropriate access to the subject parcel would be. That's why you have site planning, is among other reasons, is to establish where access and where on-site circulation is going to be for a lot, and then in this case, as it's proposed, across another lot. So, certainly we feel that any provision of cross access across 76 Queens Lane to 74 requires a site plan, and that is exactly one of the many reasons why you would have a site plan, is to work out those details.
On 76.
Yeah, for both lots.
Yeah, right, well, 74 now. Okay. I want to cover the last couple of questions and.
Well, would you be amenable to changing the access to 76 further south?
I think I would. Now, I don't know, the planning department would go on, Eric is suggesting
That
that
would
would.
require a site plan.
Yeah, he's gonna want a site plan.
Yeah, no, I understand. We're still not directly opposite, is it Stewart's Lane?
Yeah, it's not necessarily the end of the world, but something we'd want to look at and consider through site plan review.
I think it would be beneficial for 74, which is the subject property, to have the shortest connection through.
What about trucks making that turn, because the way it's situated now, they sort of have almost a straight line coming down from that, what would be the easement, to come down to that 20-foot opening. If you make the access on 76 further south, it wouldn't be as straight of a line. They would have to come in and then turn. Is
Yeah,
there?
no, I mean, they do right angle turn off Queens Lane and you go almost into the back. I don't know, at first blush, it doesn't strike me that
Yeah,
it would be a problem.
Just curious, if that would be a problem.
You might want to get an engineer to look at it and make sure
Yeah.
that the turn can be made without too much deterioration of the road, and, you know, the easement.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is that it will work pretty well, but, you know,
So-
that's something to look at. I agree.
So we're having the building inspector review the septic system. We're going to do a site plan on 76
What do
and
you
look
want?
to see if.
Well, do we have consent? Do we have?
Do we have
real
consensus on that? Thank you.
Yeah,
Do we have consensus on that?
Yeah, I'm just,
I think it makes sense.
yeah. Don't we want the fire department to look at this too? It's just emergency vehicle access. It's gonna come.
Fire department only looks at fire protection. They don't look, it's your job and your engineer's job to look at access.
Well, it just seems to me that we're gonna have the potential for emergency vehicle access.
Are you suggesting that the porta sands might all
Burn up.
explode?
I will say, as part of the standard, referral process for a site plan, this has gone to the fire marshal's office. The property to the north is a storage yard. And then this property, the only structure obviously is habitable structure, the residence. They've already looked at it and said that there's adequate firefighting capability. A fire truck would almost certainly, pull off of Queens Lane here to the residence, so
They
they
have their
don't
own
really
driveway.
need to get to the back of the site. But in the file, it's already essentially signed off by fire personnel, so.
That's part of it.
I'm trying to think of the future. It could have, right, we could have both properties developed and no longer want the access. That's a possibility in the future. That they each come in with a separate site plan and they no longer use the access easement.
Let me just say, one of my thoughts here, and kind of on the fly, is that for 76 Queens Lane, which is the northern parcel, they're probably better suited with a more southerly driveway because it gives them a little bit more space at the northern end of the lot, should they want to put a building.
For sure.
With the driveway coming in right in the middle of it,
Yeah.
there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, but that's your undefined
right.
easement. This
Yeah.
way it's defined and it's
Right.
in the
But
lease.
but I'm saying even just the fact that the driveway comes in right in the middle,
Yeah,
where do you put a building?
hey, your property. It's my client's property.
That's why I'm suggesting, but maybe we should move that driveway.
Somebody came up with something that's useful from you.
All right, so you want site plan, you're gonna send the one thing to the question of the septic to the building
We all
inspector.
agree on, let's.
If you're willing to do it, I mean, look, I don't remember this coming up. It was in the November memo for sure. You had access to that. You requested a
No,
journal.
no, we never had the November memo.
Well, it was
Never seen
posted online. I mean,
Wow.
if you knew you're on the agenda, it's.
It was in the March memo too, I checked.
All right, okay.
And if you're willing to do it, it seems to make sense because I do think that access is important. And, if you want to move it to the south, then we'll talk about the details of that. But that's what I was implying when I said like.
I'll have to, look, I have to talk to the client. I mean, the client hasn't told me to move the driveway. I just think it might make the most sense, so we'll have to talk about
You
it.
can also let them know that there seems to be sentiment on the board that favors that. So,
One other thing, sometimes situation like this, we ask, if you're gonna do a site plan on the northern lot, to put a hypothetical building, industrial building. that would
Let's
be-
not push the guy too far.
Yeah, I just think,
Look, you might be right, Randy. We
Yeah.
might even want to do that,
right,
but I hate to be required because my client is trying to restart his business here.
he's using it, for anything but a permanent
The structure
building
right now. I know.
yeah.
It's kind of,
And
Your planners can do that, though.
A lot of moving parts.
as far as the dissolving this access, so let's say that in the future he sells both lots to different owners. They no longer want the access easement. They're gonna both come in directly. How does this get dissolved? it has to be both parties.
Well, both parties, the question would be whether the planning board would have to approve the dissolution too, I suppose. That would be the question.
But it'd be probably both lot owners.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It gets trickier though, because the zone, I mean,
Well, let me say this. The person who's the benefited property, which is 74 Queens Lane, if they want to say, I'm giving away the easement, that's a unilateral decision, right? They just can't have their easement taken away by the neighboring owner without the consent of the benefited party.
but you have a variance because, and I agree with you, by the way, and I think we should probably send another letter to the town board saying why. If we're trying to have more, housing and affordable housing, why can't you have two uses, one residential and one commercial? I agree with you on
Code
that.
should be changed.
But the code is the code. You got a variance. There was concern about people accessing through the residential property. So, to your point about why not just separate at some point, I think that's tricky because I think part of this whole process is implied that's not what's going to happen.
No, but I mean, Randy, look, 75 years down the road, I'll be surprised if the house is still there. Right? I mean, someday you got to figure.
Sure.
Commercial lot, somebody's going to buy the property, you just want to have two uses on there, and the house is kind of in the way. So,
Right.
long term, you have to figure that out to figure that possibility.
Well, does anybody agree with that? That maybe we should, is there any reason not, that anybody sees to not allow for one commercial and one residential use in a commercial zone? I mean, I don't
No.
understand.
It's already been approved by the zoning board.
Policy?
Change the code.
No, to change the code. Yeah.
No, I think they should.
I think
I
that,
agree.
I'm sympathetic to you because you wouldn't be here otherwise.
I think we did that, didn't we do that with that furniture store? Like, we asked them to put the apartment above the garage on the same property, and then I remember Britton saying, but are we gonna be allowed to do that? Because it's commercial, and they did allow them to do that.
I think the code should be changed.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we should send that letter because there's all this talk about housing. I think this is something that makes sense.
Yeah, we can send a letter to the
Yeah,
town.
why don't you, let's circulate that and we can take a look at that and see if it says it the way we want to say it. That'd be fine. All right, the last question, so we've covered the first three questions. The last one, should the site plan indicate areas of gravel into a substrate proposed in each of the truck trailer storage areas and sanitary unit storage area? I guess that.
Yeah, we'll clarify that.
That'll- yeah, that's-
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we move on to New Singular Wireless at St. Peter's Chapel. Narrowly, so this is where Ed steps away, but it's not. Eric's going to cover it. I see a whole bunch of people back there. I'm presuming that at least one of you is the applicant. All of you. Okay. Who's the lucky person who's the point? You're the lucky point. Okay, very good. And Randy, you got it? Okay.
Just, we're gonna have a planning person.
Mr. Shan.
Are you gonna,
Yes.
yeah. okay.
Read them
Oh,
out,
I
sure.
thought when you said Randy, I thought.
No, you're the planning
Yeah,
board
yeah.
guy.
Yeah. I thought you were putting me up.
No, that's it.
Not yet. Hold that thought.
Give it time. There are other matters on the agenda.
You know you're chomping at the bit.
Just give me a second to call up the visuals here. Also log into my computer. Okay, so the planning board reviewed this at its last meeting, as you will probably all remember. And then additionally, since that time, the ARB, the Architectural Review Board, has also reviewed the application. The ARB made some general comments regarding the, in particular, the equipment area, the fencing that's proposed in that area. You have not received formal written comments from the ARB yet. However, a separate approval from the ARB will be required. So the applicants are going through that process currently. Screen share here. So this is an elevation drawing of the proposal, which again is a 70-foot monopole with equipment cabinet towards the center of the property. And if I can, yeah, I'll leave that up for now. So you received a report from Cityscape, which is the town's wireless consulting firm. They basically, well, they recommend approval, but with 5 notes and/or conditions. The first is that generator fuel storage needs to comply with county, state, and federal requirements, and that also the noise level needs to comply with the town code requirements. The second point was that basically that updated coverage map should be supplied. They just had an issue with the notation of the, the calculation used to provide the coverage estimates. Their third point was that the applicant should provide a structural analysis of the pole. That should be easy to supply. It's just a matter of designing the pole to meet hurricane force wind standards. The fourth point was that the applicant should provide a letter of determination of no hazard to air navigation from the FAA. Again, that is something that should be ultimately easy to obtain. This is a 70-foot tower, not near the airport. And then their final point was just that all feed lines need to be installed so that they're not damaged by wildlife and by weather. So the planning board, at the time of the last review, had made, in your regular post-meeting memo, had 4 specific comments. The first was that the board would like the applicant to consider an alternative design for the driveway leading to the equipment compound with associated landscaping. The applicants, in fact, submitted something this afternoon. I'm sure that their representative is going to address that. When I'm done going through the memo, I'll show you that submission, which relates to that comment. The second comment the planning board made was about exterior lighting need to meet the town code and the planning board's guidelines. The applicants have stated that they will submit that information. Again, they're proposing lighting just on the edge of the equipment compound. That should be easy to demonstrate compliance with. The other point that the board previously made was that the applicant should clarify the noise output of the proposed generators. That was, again, also echoed by Cityscape in their comments. We have not seen that information as of the date of this memorandum. And then the final point that the planning board made at the last review was that the applicant should clarify what existing mature trees, quantities, and locations will need to be removed for the proposed facility. Again, that is addressed in the submission that was received this afternoon, which I'll get to in a second. So basically, this information was not received as of the date of our memorandum, and it still needs to be submitted to the file. And then the board should also discuss if any of that list of requested changes to the proposed project should and can be made conditions of approval, as opposed to requiring that immediately before determining completeness. Again, I remind you that you are under the confines of a settlement agreement that requires this application to be reviewed within 60 days. With that in mind, the planning department has prepared an EAF parts 2 and 3. The planning board should go through that document, determine if you agree with it, if there are any edits that need to be made. We can make those edits here this evening, provided the board does adopt a negative declaration pursuant to Secret Chapter 128 of the Town Code. Then the application would be otherwise ready for a public hearing, and we have prepared the public hearing notice for you this evening. So just quickly, as far as the submission items and visual renderings, again, just to remind the board, this is essentially a visualization photo simulation that was submitted by the applicants. Excuse me, I'm just trying to get this centered a little bit here. This particular visualization was the no happy medium there. Again, this is, obviously existing and proposed straight look at the facility from Old Stone Highway. The ARB made a specific recommendation about the white plastic fencing there, recommending that be switched out with wood or cedar, or at the very least something of a natural tone. The planning board had discussed this, well, what I'll do here is zoom out and go to the overhead site plan of this facility to show you. So this would be with Old Stone Highway at the top of your screen. You'd have to rotate this 90 degrees north is to your right as you look at this. What you can see is in the light gray, the outline of the existing chapel building and associated structures and additions. The facility is proposed to be that equipment compound adjacent to the chapel building with that straight run access road in from Old Stone Highway. I will switch over, just give me 1 second, to what was submitted by the applicants this afternoon, which was a direct response to at least a few of the board's comments from the time of last review, which was first of all to ask what mature trees would be removed on site, and then also to consider a curvilinear access that would basically prevent that straight head-in view of the facility, and then also consider some evergreen screening. So this is what was received this afternoon. This first picture is essentially what you can see here in the light gray is a mapping of any tree of a greater than 4-inch caliper on the property. So basically that's a map of the existing mature trees. And then what you can see is obviously the outline of the proposed facility and access. The trees that are indicated by darker coloration there are the ones that would need to be removed for that facility. That is the first of 3 plans that were received this afternoon. The second is an attempt to address the question of whether or not a curved access road to the site would be a superior layout. The idea here, again, obviously, is to prevent that straight view into the facility along Old Stone Highway. Again, as it is illustrated here, and I'll show you the aerial too, there is a patch of vegetation in this area of the property, which was in part the impetus for proposing this alternative, with the hope that that existing vegetation could serve as some form of natural screening. Again, as you can see here is the complete tree map of the property, and then in the darker coloration of the trees that would need to be removed for this plan, this alternative access layout. And then this third drawing that was submitted is essentially the existing, currently proposed access configuration with the straight-in shot from Old Stone Highway. And then what you see illustrated, those circles around the perimeter, is proposed arborvitae evergreen screening, essentially just in a single row. The idea there being to cut the line of sight as someone is traveling either north or south along Old Stone Highway. And what I will do is I will just stop screen sharing for a second and then adjust the aerial of the property, and then I'll put that back up in front of you. But basically that's the summary of the comments that the planning department has. The agreement, the settlement agreement, and the timeline that it dictates basically requires the board to discuss the EAF parts 2 and 3, decide on a secret determination, and then schedule the matter for a public hearing, which presumably would be April 12th, if you do schedule that this evening.
What's the 60-day, when does that expire?
I forget the exact date. It's sometime in, I think it's around April 21st or 22nd. The applicant's counsel has essentially tentatively agreed that on the planning board meeting of April 26th, which would be the one subsequent to the April 12th meeting when the public hearing would be held, that the planning board would render a decision on the application. And then also the following day, April 27th, would be the next architectural review board meeting, and the architectural review board would render their decision. And let me just try to get you the aerial photograph here to aid your conversation, and also show you in a little bit more detail what I was talking about as far as the existing vegetation, because obviously looking at that site plan doesn't give you a whole lot of context. And so here is the aerial shot of the property. And I'll zoom in a little bit more. Just wanted to give you the general area there. So obviously you can see the existing vegetation, and basically the facility, the equipment compound, and the pole are proposed to be essentially dead center in the property, just to the south of the chapel building.
before we just turn it over to the applicant, has everybody on the board seen the Part 2 EAF? Because we'll do it the new way, our discussion of the EAF, but I was a little concerned because it didn't, I don't know if everybody got it beforehand, but if we all got it beforehand, and we all read it, then we'll do it the new way. Applicant.
Thank you, Chairman Kramer. Very good to see you again. It's been a couple of years now, but I'm certainly glad you're back. And thank you, Ian, for your work in the meantime running the board. Thank you, Eric, for the presentation. Eric summarized it very well, and I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, if not briefer, and not rehash too much. Matt Fitzgerald with Phillips Lund, sorry. Representing AT&T. We've got our full team here with us today. If there are any questions, I think we've really covered everything at this point. I don't expect we need to call on them, but if so, they are here and available to you. I just want to hit one note, and then we can kind of quickly run through Eric's point. I just want to quickly run the board through the alternate driveway, the landscape proposal, the tree information. The generator noise information was, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. It's included in Exhibit I. It tells you the noise output. What we did here on one of the notes on this supplemental submission, I think it's the last note on the page there, like note 7, I want to say.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you're correct.
Yeah. So note 7 is where we demonstrate compliance with the town's noise ordinance. And what it is during the daytime hours, if we are running it for testing purposes, it would be 65 decibels. So I think that's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. In any event, AT&T, when it runs its testing, does so at whatever time the board feels appropriate. It can be scheduled because it's not set to be a certain time. We would never run it deliberately at night unless the board wanted us to, which I think it's probably safe to assume you wouldn't want us to. When it runs for emergency purposes, which would be the only time it would run at night, it's exempt from the town's noise ordinance. But in any event, what the results show is that it's 62 dBA at the closest property line, assuming it's running at full bore, which is when it's testing, it's not doing, it's running at a lower power level. So it's fully compliant at the nearest property line. And that calculation that's in there is a worst case scenario assumption that assumes no noise attenuation from the surrounding fence, equipment, trees. And again, it's to the property line. So there's additional distance to the residences themselves. So we are fully compliant with the code. And this is a worst case scenario calculation to get us there. So we were very conservative in that estimate to ensure compliance.
How long is the test? How long?
The testing, typically, I think, I'm going to look to Matt Limbaum because my recollection is it no more than an hour it would run?
I think it's actually only half an hour.
Half an hour? Okay. So
that was my next question. Okay.
Yeah. So half an hour bi-weekly. And again, the timing of that, if the board's preference is, can you test that at noon on a certain day? That's really not an issue.
Normally nationwide, I think it's kind of 12 noon on either a Wednesday or a Thursday.
Not 9 a.m. Monday?
No. It's the middle of the week at noonish, and that's pretty much nationwide. They test everything all of those at the same time.
Okay.
So
I know one that's at 9 a.m. on Monday. It's outside our purview.
It won't be this one. So we've got that going for us at least. On the generator point, I don't think we've received a copy of the cityscape report. I heard most of the points that were raised. On the first one was with respect to generator fuel storage. I can confirm we'll comply with all applicable laws, codes, rules, including those from the county. So that's not an issue. Eric, could you just rehash for me what the second one was?
Sure. I can give you a copy of the report too. I thought that they had sent it to you directly.
If they didn't, I missed it. I apologize.
No problem. Their second was just about updating the coverage maps. They said that the calculation methods used in it were actually, they said it was somewhat of a conservative estimate of your coverage capability, but they just wanted a clarification.
Yeah, and we can do that. I would say that as the board knows, there's certainly no doubt about the existence of the significant gap. It's noted in the settlement agreement. I think the request is probably just to include the DBA for the power levels that are assumed for in-building, in-vehicle, and outdoor coverage. We're happy to do that. it doesn't really change anything from the board perspective, I don't think, but if Cityscape would like us to do that, we're happy to supply that information. On the structural analysis request, we did submit structural documentation to them. Their memo may have predated that, supplying that information, but the information was supplied and demonstrates that the tower will of course be able to support the equipment proposed, which for new towers is almost always going to make sense because it's being built solely for the purpose of carrying the equipment that's proposed to go on it. With the fourth point, no hazard to air travel, my recollection is that I thought that a no hazard determination had been submitted. I know that certainly one was for the prior application. I've personally run one because you can go online and do them themselves for this facility, and I know that there is no issue here. This is an extremely low facility that barely clears the tops of the nearest trees. If the board would like to see that, we'd be happy to do so. I would just say from a human health and safety perspective, though, you have enough information on the seeker side to make a determination that there's no risk to human health from that. As a general rule, it's not unless you're very close to an airport or over 200 feet that you start having to do things like lighting a tower or anything like that. And certainly we're well away from both of those thresholds. What was the last Cityscape?
Their last was about feed lines being installed and sealed to prevent damage from wildlife, which would be standard.
Right, yeah.
Part of it.
My recollection is everything inside the compound will be sealed appropriately, and then everything outside the compound is trenched, running to the roadway. One of the things we were able to avoid here was the need to put in a new utility pole at the side of the road. It would have been, I think, unfortunate to do all this work to try and screen the facility only to then have a new utility pole. Everything's trenched underground to avoid exactly that. So I don't see that as a concern either. This is the existing proposed driveway. And in bold are the trees which would be removed. We went through and we counted. There are 18 trees of 4 inches diameter or more that would be impacted. They're within the clearing for the proposed facility. That includes both the drive as well as the compound. If you flip to the alternate design, you get the curve. And as I flagged 2 weeks ago, and it's not really surprising, because you do this curve, you're impacting a greater area of the property, and you actually impact 24 trees. You can play around with this and find other ways to make it work. This is the one that we were able to get our construction team to look at the most quickly because it's the simplest. But pretty much any way you work any kind of curved driveway, you're gonna do a couple of things. One is you're gonna impact more trees because they're relatively evenly dispersed across the property. But the other thing I'll point out, and I'm just gonna approach the board to do this, is the disadvantage to the straight driveway is that there is one spot that has a straight shot view of the facility going right down it if you're going straight by on Old Stone Highway. The advantage here is the thought that, well, you're going to kind of have trees along most of the way, but you're going to significantly thin out a couple of swaths of trees here, including some that buffer the residences on this side. So you're getting some relief here because you're going to leave these to screen this view. You're going to impact a greater angle of the view shed, so to speak, if you spread that out. I'll say that we don't have, AT&T does not currently have, to my knowledge, the property rights to implement this driveway either. Our lease rights are for the proposed driveway that we have for the facility that we have with the church. So this is not something that I can guarantee that AT&T would have permission from the property owner to go forward and do. And so with all of that in mind, what we did is we went to the drawing board on the landscaping side, which is the last page here. And what we sought to do is not just the driveway itself, but also all the way around the facility to give as much screening as possible to the adjacent property owners, including those to the immediate rear of the property. So our thought is at the end of the day, this is the least impactful in terms of tree removal to get access to the site. So we think that this does continue to make the most sense as the proposed access point with the addition of the landscaping that we're now proposing. The other thing I'll just note, not that it necessarily would be an issue with the other driveway design, but Eric, if you could just, sorry, thank you, Eric.
Up to the,
Yeah, this one right here. So the proposed telco route, as I mentioned, is currently proposed to be trenched underground. We assume, without having done a utility walk, that that's still feasible here. But we don't know because we haven't been able to have contact with the utility to go out, do a utility walk, and confirmed that they wouldn't require a utility pole for the additional length that would need to be trenched. It's possible it wouldn't be an issue, but it is possible that they would come back and say, hey, we need you to put a utility pole at the end of your driveway so that we can run overhead lines to the other utility pole in the vicinity of the site. So, this was our effort to come up with something that we proposed. Again, I think you end up impacting more trees. So I don't know that it's a cleaner solution. You also get closer to the neighbor who, to the left here, but it's actually to the south of the site by doing this, and you're impacting trees that are closer to them rather than keeping everything tight into the center of the property, which I think was really the goal of the original design. So happy to hear any thoughts from the planning board on that, but those are the updates to the application. Before I just quickly touch on seeker, happy to answer any questions the board may have.
I don't have questions. I have an opinion, but
We'll do opinions later.
Have you guys checked? I know typically there's a warning sign about the I guess the microwave or whatever it is, that if a repair person works on the tower, there's a certain distance where it warns people. Did you guys check that in terms of people congregating in that chapel?
Absolutely. So we submitted an RF health and safety report that demonstrated that, and this is usually the case for a macro site like this, where it's of this height, there is absolutely no risk to anyone in the chapel, and the report that's a part of the record will bear this out. It's my understanding it was also reviewed by the town's consultant, Cityscape. It was a part of the package of materials that was provided to them. And I know the board knows this, but I'll say it as much for benefit of members of the public who may be watching, because we provided demonstration of compliance with all FCC requirements. The planning board is preempted from doing anything further in terms of RF health impacts on either humans or the environment generally. But to answer your question, yes, we absolutely looked at that. It's absolutely documented in the record that it's not a health and safety concern there.
So let's say it's all built.
Sure.
What are you gonna have on you're gonna have a big truck? Do you need a big truck to come up this driveway? I mean, what are you gonna really need at the end of the day to maintain this spot?
Yeah, so one of the things you think of is, okay, if we're going to do a future antenna replacement, we come back before this board for, I don't know whether it's tier 1 or 2 application, depends on what we'd be doing, but you'd want to be able to have access for that future improvements, as well as in the event of an emergency, if something were to happen, if there was, say there was a power outage and the generator, failed or something like that, where there was some need to access the site with heavy equipment in order to ensure continued operation in the event of an emergency. That's the thought, is you just need to have continued access to that. And this is the specs for the driveway are what we need to ensure that we're able to do that in terms of the width of it, the length of it, things like that, the turn radius for the curved version. That's what we're looking at. Frequency of access is absolutely minimal. It's not going to be used very often because it's an unmanned facility. You're only going there to make improvements or to do inspections, things like that.
Okay.
All right, you wanted to cover SECRA separately, or?
I was just going to have a couple of comments on seeker just very quickly for the board, because I know you're going to work through part 2 tonight. So what I would say is that in the board, as much as anyone's aware of this, you have, as a part of the record of this application, thousands of, I feel comfortable saying, thousands of pages of documents over the history of the application that's stretching back to 2015. I couldn't fit them all in my carry-on from my flight down here, so I feel very confident saying that because I have them all sitting on my desk. The documentation pretty clearly shows, and the board found back on the prior application that was denied, that there was no risk of a significant adverse environmental impact from a telecommunications facility on this site. The one thing I'll hit on, because it's the one thing that arguably has, I'll put changed in air quotes, is the designation of the church itself as a structure that's eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. What I'll say is that this design that we're proposing, as we've documented from correspondence with the State Historic Preservation Office, this is their preferred design. In terms of impacts on historic structures, they would prefer that the planning board go with this one versus the Campanile. In addition, they requested that we consider doing things like the landscaping, which we've now incorporated as a part of our site plan approval process. So from the State Historic Preservation Office perspective, we've done everything we've been asked to do in order to mitigate any potential significant adverse impact. I'll say again, the other advantage of this facility is it has no structural interaction with the chapel itself. It's completely separated. We're not even running telco along their existing telco lines, which currently runs overhead across Old Stone Highway. So we're having absolutely no impact on any of the physical characteristics of the chapel, and we're not doing anything that would compromise the architectural history of the chapel by creating a stealth structure, which, in the words of Shippo, could create a false sense of architectural history by trying to blend in and, fooling people who might be unfamiliar with the structure itself. So on that end, we would say that the fact that the chapel is historic alone doesn't mean that any impact to it would be significant, and we feel that we've sufficiently mitigated any such impacts here.
This may be sure in terms of our conversation, but could you bring up the photo, the one from
The aerial?
Yeah. No, not the
The photo simulation?
just straight on.
Yeah.
The one that shows what it's going to look like from the road. No, photo.
Yeah, I know, I'm getting there.
Thank you. Sorry. There you go. That one.
Yeah.
Lower, no.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Everyone's favorite, yeah. Eric knows.
Everyone's favorite. Why not the one that's in the white sheath? That looks like what's that called, Eric? Stealth monocle. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Why not?
it's a great question, and there's a couple of issues you can run into with those that is the reason we went with this design. One of them is when you do that, the antennas you use typically have to be spaced out more so on the tower. They're typically different kinds of antennas that operate at lower power, so they don't broadcast as well. I shouldn't say as well, they're not designed to broadcast like these. The other issue you get is you have to, in order for it to not to be just, a solid mass, just as circular, kind of defeating the point of the stealthing, is you have to space out the antennas in additional tranches vertically. So here what we've done to try and narrow the profile of the tower as much as possible is put it into two flush mounted configurations rather than what I'll call the traditional configuration that you would see if it was still light out and you looked out there, where it's the triangle attached at one centerline height. So that's why we went with this, because if we did it the other way, you would need to go up, and we were trying to minimize height as much as possible. So that was the goal.
And you need to go up, I mean to interrupt.
No.
On the stealth monopole, it would need to be taller, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so if we were to stack the antennas vertically in there and to stack the other equipment that you see in there, that would, we haven't designed that out, but we know from prior applications where this question's been asked, you go up vertically in height. So you'd result in a taller structure, and the thought here was, it seems more sensible to do it this way, if for no other reason than this is fully compliant with the code and the setback requirements and the pyramid.
You get into fall issues.
You reminded me of two quick points from the Architectural Review Board. One was there was a comment that there was a preference that the pole, rather than being brown, be the galvanized steel, which was also the preference of the town for the Iacono Farms brush dump pole. That was my understanding to be the preference of the ARB. If that bears out in their written comments, then we're happy to do that. It makes no difference to us in that sense, so that's fine. The other was to go for as Eric mentioned this, a cedar color of the likely Trex material rather than white. And again, that doesn't really pose an issue there. The material, it's not going to be cedar planks because this is a functional security fence for the facility. It'll still be some kind of synthetic material, but the coloring of it is not an issue. And again, we would add in the landscaping as shown on the sketch plan.
So one thought about this entrance. If you're gonna put trees around the sides, you could actually bring that gate up to the road and it would block more of the view in.
So put a gate at the road, and are you thinking continuing the fencing down the entire way to the compound, or just put a gate at the road?
Well, if you move the gate to the road in that straight in, you're gonna, just from the perspective, you're gonna block even probably from a car, I guess it depends. How high can you go with a gate there before you're into variance territory?
4 feet.
Oh,
Or you need to go to the ARB and they can approve up to 6 feet. And then if you go over 6 feet.
And there would have to be a room for the truck to pull in too, so it couldn't be.
Well, yeah, but you see, I think what Randy, I think is getting at, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea, is if you had a gate at the road, then it's less of a, you don't see a gash, going to the structure. Now, I guess your issue is, does that gate provide security? Because you have all this footage, from the road so you need two gates, right?
It'd have to be two gates, yeah.
You need one gate at the road and one gate, and then you have this driveway behind the gate, and then you get to the actual structure with a gate.
You're hiding the gravel, is what you're saying.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking it's a gash, as you're driving by right now, as that photo, thank you, as that photograph would show, somebody driving by would, instead of seeing, what more or less could be I don't want to say natural, but a more normal looking thing, which would be, woods, gate, woods, tree, and then church, chapel. Maybe that's a good idea. I don't know.
especially if there are trees along both
Yeah,
sides of
right.
it. You don't have to make it secure. It would just be a.
Yeah,
Right, the front gate, so to speak, would be purely,
purely aesthetic.
I can take it back to AT&T. I don't have an immediate issue with that, other than it'd be something we'd run by the property owner, and if they were okay with it and AT&T didn't have an objection to it. My only concern, and this is why I want to run it by their construction team, is whether or not there's an issue with putting a gate close to the property line so that any truck that would be coming up in the meantime would be blocking Old Stone Highway while somebody jumped out.
That's my concern. I would be against it unless you left room for that.
Right, so.
Oh, you mean to pull up,
Exactly.
open the gate?
It's a real thing.
Yeah, that's the concern. And so.
Well, you can pull up along the road like people who park at the church. There's also a parking lot for the chapel.
There is, but some of it.
So what's the biggest truck you're gonna possibly get up there once it's all completed, installed?
I'll turn to, see if we got any guesses from
I mean,
my team.
It really depends. So I'm not a construction expert, but.
Can they please come up to the podium? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Matt Lindbaum, Settlement Communications for AT&T, the applicant. Not a construction expert. When they initially install it, they're gonna need a truck that has a crane. They bring in the pole in sections, they build the pole. To get equipment cabinets, they're heavy. Sometimes they don't need like a giant crane, but they're gonna need a crane to lift that up over the fence or whatever the case may be. It's not a huge deal and it's rare, but I mean, probably maybe something like that's on that photo up
For
there.
example.
Yes. So they might need something like that.
I think they just mean really routine maintenance. right?
Routine maintenance is pretty much gonna be a van, maybe, some kind of box truck, something a little bit bigger. They're not gonna have 18 wheelers out there just to do maintenance.
Sure. So I can take the concept of the gate back. What I would request of the board is that it's consideration of seeker and whatnot. Assume we go without the gate, but assume we have the landscaping and whatnot. And then if we're able to propose that as additional mitigation, we will, and it'll just be, a bonus later on in the process. I don't think that by itself is a make it or break it in terms of a determination of significance under seeker. But as we have with the landscaping, as we have with the design of the fence, the color of the pole and whatnot, we'll take it back. And if it's something we're able to do, we'll do it for the board.
Eric, do you think, what about red cedar versus arborvitae there?
You're saying along the side of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe augmenting it with some kind of lower fence might make it look a little bit more rural. But really, in the end, you're kind of just creating, a corridor of screening. So
Just arborvitae's not a native.
yeah, I mean,
It's also deer food.
Yeah, there's some cultivars that are deer resistant. But yeah, that was another thing too that I was gonna consider would be replacing those with cedars, which are less deer resistant, but more in keeping with, you know, the area. But I think that it's probably something that we could discuss with, you know, the exact nature of the planting. But, you know, the general idea here is to, you know, essentially a row. Going back to that sketch again, we got this this afternoon. But, you know, my first thought was, first of all, to have some kind of staggered row as opposed to just one after the other. And then cedar or maybe even white pines would be more appropriate. Columnar white pines would probably be more appropriate there. But I figured that's something, again, you will be holding a public hearing on this, and perhaps that's something as far as conditions or changes that's worked out through the process.
Well, it'd be nice to have something at the hearing.
Yeah, a visualization.
Public, you know.
Sure.
Well, for the public hearing, would we have to have selected an entranceway for the purposes of the public hearing? Or
Not necessarily. Ideally, certainly you want to do that, but we are in a somewhat unorthodox review process by virtue of the settlement agreement. So yes, ideally you would want to have all aspects of the proposal settled before going to the public hearing, but it is routine that comments come up during the course of public hearings on site plans that ultimately result in amendments, you know, conditions of approval, other mitigation measures that alter the plans. So
when it's presented at the public hearing, when the planning department gives its, you know, its presentation, it could say, it could look, you could have different variations of what the planning board is considering as.
Well, depending upon what's submitted by the applicants.
Okay, well,
you know, we can't propose the project.
Sounds like you're gonna get an answer pretty.
We're obviously rushing. I mean, you seem like you're willing to do whatever we want. Can we just say, I mean.
Yeah, I know, yeah, right. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say something there.
No, but I mean, the planning department knows more than us. Can we just have, I mean, we should get something.
Yeah, sure.
For the public. Can you just come up with whatever you think the best ultimate reasonable, you know, cultivars for this type of setup? Maybe a staggered row sounds like a good idea.
And what I would say is just for the purposes of seeker tonight, you can absolutely take the application as it's before you in terms of the straight shot driveway with the landscaping we're proposing. And then we'll take any comments from the planning department, absolutely, because nobody's wedded to the idea of a particular cultivar. So if Eric and the planning department have suggestions, we're happy to take a look at those and work with you on those. That's not an issue at all.
And I think if at all possible, photo simulations, you know, basically of this perspective, and then the other ones, anything you could prepare that illustrates that landscaping that, you know, was on the plan that we just received this afternoon, would aid the public hearing. It would help for the, you know, to visualize it. You might want to also incorporate a gate as an idea, you know, just a set of options. You know what I mean? For people to look at.
See what, you know, you can gauge the negativity of the reaction.
But a public hearing is not supposed to be a multiple choice. I mean,
right. It's not, but again, we have an unorthodox review process.
All this stuff is on the table, so we can say what we want to say. I mean, if everyone feels like the gate should be there, then.
What I would perhaps say here is if the board wanted to say, this is what we prefer here and now, some changes to, for example, on the driveway issue, letting us know now your preference one way or the other will help us at the public hearing. We can say, this is what we're proposing. To the extent it deviates from what the planning board requested of us, here's why we deviated, because in the last however many weeks, this is what we looked at, this was the decision making we made. And then when it comes time for your decision, you can take that into account. So I think what we're looking for, and I think, Ian, not to cut you off, I think the goal is to give the public a sense of what the project is, because while we will get, if we give them multiple options, there will be multiple opinions on them. I think we're going to wind up torn in so many different directions that we're going to, you know, kind of wish we had a proposal to weigh against.
I would suggest, you know, board can weigh in, but that we go with the irregular rows of either whatever cedar. I think cedar would be most in keeping with that neighborhood. And then as far as the gate, I don't know if you finished, Eric, on there's 4 foot, then you can go to 6 foot with the ARB. And then what, more than that, if you what?
Is a variance. As a matter of right, so to speak, someone, well, can, although this is associated with a wireless facility, but if this were, let's say, a residential property, as a matter of right, you can put a fence or a gate of up to 4 feet in height in the front yard portion of your property. Once there's a number of standards, but essentially on this property, once you get beyond 50 feet, you could go up to 6 feet. Obviously, we're not talking about going 50 feet back based on what you're saying, that the facility is about 70 feet away from the front, the pole, excuse me, is about 70. That existing, where you see the level of the gate is roughly probably 55 feet away from the property. So that gate is essentially, where you could go up to 6 feet, but you could put something in that, closer to the road up to 6 feet in height with the approval of the ARB. Once you go over 6 feet in height, you would need a variance.
So 6 feet might work, actually. You figure if you're sitting in a car.
Cut the line of sight.
I think 6 is fine, just to obscure the gravel.
I just want to reiterate, though, it's a really bad idea to not have room for a truck to pulling off the road. As somebody who drives trucks and has to access, not having at least 30 feet is, we're just setting it up so a truck has to block a dangerous road near an intersection.
Yeah, just to show you here, it's a little difficult to see, and I can zoom in a
Why
little bit.
can't it just pull up, get out of the truck, open the gate, and then go in? I don't understand the problem.
Well, we would never want to have a car parked in the right of way to access the property, I think. I could be wrong.
Because you are gonna need to stop the truck on Springs Close.
Yeah, but on the shoulder, you're not gonna be perpendicular to the.
The edge of pavement is essentially right here, a little bit off of the property. So, you could do something where you come in 15 to 20 feet, you'd be right about here. And, this is what I think, Randy, what you're getting at, something closer to the road that cuts off line of sight. You could put another gate roughly here that would leave you enough room for a van to pull off the road, be off the pavement,
Yeah, I'm not even sure. I'm not convinced that that's an issue, that a van can't pull up on the shoulder of the road, open the gate, drive in, close the gate. I don't see, are you assuming that it would be sticking out perpendicular, Ian?
No, I'm not. I think it's dangerous to have any vehicle parked necessarily in the right of way to access the property. And as somebody who has to deal with this type of a thing, I will always set gates back off of the property for that reason. It's a concern. It's different on a tractor than on a truck, but
One other aspect of the gate on the road, I would imagine that sooner or later, that driveway is going to become a parking lot during services, during chapel services.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That might not happen the first week, but, soon enough, people are going to realize, hey,
I would
park here.
Yeah, I think that would be something we would handle with the landlord, because we AT&T can't have them doing that.
Yeah,
right?
I figured you wouldn't want.
So I would say that that's something that we would have with conversations with them about, and that would be understood that this is not a parking lot and could not be used as such.
It might become an ongoing conversation.
But a gate
That's why
might
the
help.
gate,
Well,
the gate would help.
Again, I'm not, and my concern with the gate is the one that's been explained, and I'm not saying that I'm vetoing it here. What I'm suggesting, though, is that the board consider the application that's before it here for seeker, because if we can propose a gate and it works and it's a good idea, it's only an environmental benefit to everybody. It's an aesthetic plus. So what I wouldn't want to do is to factor it into the board's decision-making, come back and find out, for the reasons that have been said, it's actually a big health and safety issue. We can't do it. It doesn't make sense to do it. And then it casts doubt on your determination under seeker. We have to go back and redo all of it after the public hearing. So that's my concern. But I will say that if, you consider this application as it is, we will take into account all of the comments with respect to landscaping, with respect to the fence, and in advance of the public hearing, submit those materials that would be needed to show you, okay, here's what we're proposing for the purpose of the public hearing for your decision. That's, from my perspective, that's what
no
makes
one
sense.
likes a curved driveway?
Doesn't sound like it. Are you?
I'm the only one. I'm the only one.
I mean, I like
let-
it, but I'm not sure if it's really, we're not gaining that much from it.
Let's move into our discussion, which is Randy's.
So, I mean, I do prefer it, the look of it, but I don't know if we're really getting,
Well, I would worry about the impact on the neighbors, but again,
yeah,
let's,
that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's worth it because of all the,
let Randy, lead us.
So I guess we've discussed, is any further information required at this time? Yep, so as far as we could do the part 2.
You want to do that right off the bat?
yeah, I think so.
Okay. Has everyone had a chance to look at it?
Yes.
The only impact that was identified as moderate to large is number 8. Will the proposed action impair the character or quality of important historic, archaeological, architectural, or aesthetic resources? And that one is identified as moderate to large. Does anybody dispute that that's moderate to large?
No.
All around the table? Okay. Now, regarding the other 10, does all the rest have been identified as no or small impact?
I would add 3 as moderate to large.
Everybody knows, though, that the part 3, if we check anything as yes, it has to be explained.
Not
as-
part 3.
Well,
Well, I know,
Maybe
but
we change,
it
we have to
doesn't-
change
I
it.
think it's
Change to, we have
futile
to
for
go
us to
through.
go through part 2 as if these check boxes,
Yeah.
because, I mean, part 3 says explicitly, if we check that,
Yeah.
we have to explain why it's been mitigated. So it's not just changing a checkbox. We'll then have to, and you can see they do that, as everyone read it, so that they do that with respect to the one that was checked. Go through a lot of reasons
I
why.
understand.
Well, it's
In other words, don't move something lightly
Yeah.
from no or small impact to moderate or large impact, unless we're prepared to say what the mitigation is.
I agree with Sharon. I think 3 should be
But
moderate
I
to
think the
large.
mitigation is in place. I mean, we're, you know, with the, you know, addition of the screening and the gates and whatever, we're working on that to improve but
We don't have any.
So you're saying that what we already have stated regarding number 8 applies to number 3 as well?
I think so.
Anybody else on number 3?
3, I agree with
I think that's the
Sharon.
only one I would change.
Uh,
I mean, I think the community would think that they are being impacted.
Yeah, I would actually say one, for me, I would say 1, 2, and 3, because I consider this an industrial use in a residential neighborhood. So to me, it creates a material conflict with zoning regulations, and it also results in a change in the use or intensity of the use of land. To have an industrial site in a close-knit neighborhood next to a chapel, to me, is.
I guess that to me, I agree with you, but it's small, in my opinion.
What resulted in a change in the use of the land? Let's go around the table on this. Other than number 3, do you have any
That's the only
others?
one I would change.
Randy?
I would go with 1, 2, and 3, and keep 8.
8, and I gotta think about 3.
Yeah.
I would vote to support it as already drawn up, drafted.
Lou?
As is. As is.
You're as is? I lean towards 3 also. So what do we do if we're 3 and 3 on 3?
Well, look, I think it'd be irresponsible to not move forward on this. If you guys want to check 3, fine.
Well, I'm prepared to
I
go with
just-
3 and identify the mitigation as the same mitigation as number 8. So that there's no need to rewrite part 3, the analysis.
They're not exactly.
Council?
No, I mean, you can definitely do that if you find it similar enough where the mitigation would be applicable to both of them.
You would write one answer that covers both.
Yeah,
Sure.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think that's what Sharon said.
Yeah, but I mean, one is specifically historic, archaeological, architectural, aesthetic. And the other is character or quality of the existing community. So
Yeah, you see the way
you
I
could
look at it?
still answer it in one paragraph.
But the
Well, those paragraphs
character,
exist currently, so if we're going through this, everybody should look at that as,
the character and quality of
And
the
if it's a-
neighborhood is inherent in its architectural, and aesthetic resources. I think that.
I no argument that you.
I will, just for, I'm not to sway your decision one way or the other, but just so you know, as the person that drafted the document, in part 3, the written out explanation, there is nothing in there that's specific to addressing the impact on the character and quality of the existing community, which is number 3, written out in the explanation. And as Ian pointed out, when you do mark something moderate or large in the part 2, you're supposed to specifically address it in the part 3. There's nothing in the part 3 as I drafted it that specifically addresses mitigation of that impact. So if you do want to check that, we have to work to amend part 3 this evening, just so you know.
In other words, more language.
More language.
Unless you feel that it is adequate, but there is nothing in there that's specifically directed at that issue. Just letting you know.
Well, I think it's covered in number 8 then. I'm willing to leave it as is with that.
then we would have 4 votes.
Yeah.
I'm looking for words in your.
I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but I think that I'm going to make a motion to make a negative declaration.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, all those in favor?
As is, you're saying?
As if he's saying as.
No, I'm a no.
I'm good. Aye.
So we have a second, we got a motion, a second?
Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? 4-2. Okay. Anything else? Well, we need to have we have the motion to schedule the public hearing. So,
Well, now that we've done secret, do we want to give any final guidance or consensus about the gate or the
I
landscaping?
think he's gonna find out.
Yeah, I don't know that you need
I don't
to
think we
do
need
it
to
as
do it
part
right
of
now.
SECR. I think you can include it as,
No, I don't think we do, but I do think it's important in the interest of the public just to know have as complete of a plan as possible. So I think that there's some strong opinion about the gate, if it's possible. My only comment, and I might be the only one, is that I think it's got to be at least 20 and probably 30 feet, which still might be a benefit. But I think that we should maybe have a consensus if.
Yeah, and that's really what I was getting at with the first question. Is there any further information you need at this time? And that would be something
Not for
you
SECR, but for
not for
public hearing.
SECR, but just for the application.
whether the double gate idea is viable. And if it is viable, under what conditions, particularly taking into,
Well, unless you guys disagree with that, because I would hate, I don't want to have a situation where we have 4 different opinions on the planning board and then 4 more from the public, then what do we do? So.
we pick. That's what it boils down to. We say what makes the most sense, what meets the requirements of SECR, and we pick.
So does anybody here have a leaning of a no gate right on the road, or gate with the truck setback?
I would like to see a rendering of this proposal, because my first thought was like, why are we putting a gate there? And is the gate gonna be like the spruce stockade fencing or another white fence?
And to further complicate
none of them are
things,
gonna be
but
white.
just so that
Let's
to further complicate things, but just so that you're clear on this, I presume that this gate would not be 4 feet in height. So if you are going to incorporate that in the project, it will need express approval of the ARB as an exception granted under their
Is
authority.
there a timing issue with getting that in front of the ARB vis-a-vis the settlements that there's a
Yes.
stipulation? There will be. Gee. Well, that throws a monkey wrench in the
How
idea.
wide is that driveway? What's the width of it?
As drawn, I believe
would you, 20 feet?
With the driveway.
I'm not sure off the top of my head and I don't have it scaled out, so.
You know, with driving by, what's
Yeah.
less objectionable? A fence a few feet back, or an open
I think a
driveway?
fence a few
My,
feet
my
back would be
opinion
funny.
is that all those trees on both sides, the only objectionable view is if you stop right in front of the driveway and look down the driveway. If you're driving past, it'll go by in an instant. Nobody's living right across the street from that driveway and looking at it all the time. It's just one glimpse of an eye. So what's the big deal?
Yeah, and I think a fence back 30 feet
I think
makes
the
no
important
sense.
thing is the trees on the side, because that's what's gonna.
Well, 30 feet back, I think it's silly. Then it's like,
Well, they need the fence 30 feet back for
to get the
security.
truck.
No, for security.
Oh, no, no,
for
the one at the
Well,
end, of course.
That's gonna stay there.
I'm just saying, but to put one not on the road and
Oh,
put it,
and,
a second.
yeah, well,
just-
yeah,
that
I
seems-
agree with you about that.
The first
To allow
fence,
a truck
Eric, the
in.
first fence is 55 feet
Yeah.
into the driveway?
Roughly.
Yeah, so if you
Yeah,
put
it's
one
the
30
ARV
feet,
doesn't
you're covering
use-
20 feet of
May
space.
not
I mean,
time.
it's silly.
That's the problem. If that's gonna
I
require
mean,
a
I think I
variance
agree with
application.
you.
No, 6 doesn't.
I think that gate in the end
6
is
is,
redundant.
they can approve 6.
Now you're against it.
I think it's
No,
becoming
no, no, no.
redundant. Yeah, I think it's, especially if it's gonna go in.
I think if it goes in, it's redundant. It doesn't, see, to my mind's eye, the idea of a fence on the road, it just kind of blends in. But if it's not right there on the road, or maybe a foot or two off the road, it defeats the purpose of it. It's like, a fence is a fence.
I'm for no fence at this point, if we're gonna vote on it.
So I think we got 3 no fences, maybe Ian is 4.
I don't have strong opinions. I just want to have an accurate public hearing where people know what's, and I don't want to be in a position where you propose something that we don't actually want, if we don't,
Well,
and then the public want,
I mean, look, the public, which very well may be watching tonight, could get up and say, hey, we think that this thing should be, who wants to see a long driveway and a fence way down there? And if maybe there's sentiment in the public for
Well,
that. But,
it seems like we have 4 votes that are tentatively okay without the gate,
fine.
but it's on the table, so maybe seem to be a pretty thorough guy. Just do the research and see if it were to come up with the public hearing, that it could work at wherever it might work.
And can I just ask a question? It sounds like if it needed to be set back, that a majority of the board would not
From my
favor
couch.
the fence.
It seems like that, but the public might be watching
Sure,
and they
sure.
disagree with us. And so if you knew,
Of course, yeah.
yes, we could do that, but it has to be, only in this case. Or you can do it right on the road. I don't know, whatever it is.
And not to repeat, what might be a completely moot point, the whole parking thing might be something that when you guys go back to the office, you might say, and you might not.
And if they say, you know what, the fence, the gate at the road is a great idea, let's do it, and we can do it right at the road, it's not a safety concern, we'll come back with that. But as is noted, we'll take it back and we'll,
I'm not an engineer, so don't take it,
that's why I need to go back, right? Yeah, I need to talk to people who are.
That's where it's coming from.
Well, the other thing is,
Valid.
the other thing is, so then Eric, you're gonna do the landscaping with them?
Yeah.
And Randy, it seemed like you wanted this sort of a more staggered look, and
Well,
that seems like a good idea to me.
I think that was Eric's idea,
And I agree.
Staggered.
Idea.
more
I
of
think
a
you-
native,
Yeah.
native trees.
Deer are horrendous in the neighborhood, so I do
Yeah.
think deer, resistance is important.
I think the prudent thing to do is to, and obviously this is your decision, but move it forward to the public hearing, which would be April 12th. It would be back on, hear the public's comments because, they may weigh in on a number of these potential modifications. The application would be brought back to you on the 27th, ideally for a determination, a resolution, and have a discussion about the public comments, have a discussion about all these things that we're talking about this evening, and discuss it with the applicant's representative and determine what you can incorporate into the project as conditions or modifications, and then go from there. You know, you don't have to solve it all this evening, is
No, we
essentially what I'm
don't, but I
getting
mean,
at.
it seems like it might, since all of us looked at this driveway and were like, oh, maybe there could be something better. That if the applicant is willing, and we have, I mean, it's not, we don't have to like do a lot of research on this. Have some sort of rendering or an idea of what's proposed, so that we have a starting point, and then.
Yeah. That would
That's
be
just-
ideal.
That's what I think.
No, no, it's probably a good idea to make things flexible for the public, because, you know.
And if we want it to be, oh, sorry.
No, there's always-
If you want to be arborvitae, it can be. It seems like none of us agree about that. I think that's a good idea. So.
Can I just summarize? I just want to make sure. I'm going to summarize what I've heard, and then, yeah, I'll come up. I'll summarize what I've heard. If I've heard incorrectly, I'll be corrected. But what I've heard is, unless this board feels strongly otherwise right now, AT&T is going to understand there will be public input at the public hearing and further discussion. We are going to move forward with the direct driveway that knocks down the fewest number of trees, preserves as many as possible. We will get additional input from the planning department with respect to the landscaping for our consideration, that if it's feasible and makes sense, we'll incorporate into our site plan in advance of the public hearing. We will look into the gate issue with the understanding, again, subject to public comment, that there may not be an appetite for it if it has to be set back, but we'll look into it and see if that's the case. And anything I missed there?
That's it.
It's good.
If you find that the second gate makes sense, you need to fold that into your ARP discussion.
Yes,
Right, yeah.
And consider the timing issues of getting it before the ARB.
Sure, that would be something we'd, you know, I've got to take a look back at the calendar and
Yeah.
kind of war game it all out, but absolutely.
Right, to back into it. I'm sorry?
They have meetings the 23rd and the 6th.
Right, it has to, but, you know, we've got the stipulation looming over us, so.
Beware the odds of March.
Beware the, and beware the stipulation on the Ides of March. So, all right, with that, Randy, would you like to read a motion?
Matter of new singular wireless at St. Peter's Chapel, site plan special permit, personal wireless service facility, Suffolk County tax map 300-1036, 24.1, resolution to schedule a public hearing. Public hearing will be held live and in person by the planning board and will be available electronically by video, teleconferencing, and will be televised on local TV, Channel 22, and available for live stream on the LTV website. The public shall be permitted to appear in person, but may also provide comments on the matter being heard by calling 351-888-6331. A public hearing is hereby scheduled to be held at Town Hall, 159 Panago Road, East Hampton, on Wednesday, April 12th, 2023, at 7 p.m. or soon thereafter, as this matter may be heard. Read the resolution, move for its adoption.
Please.
Am I going with the plans called out in the reso, or am I going with the plans submitted today that we?
Plans submitted with the that are going to be presented.
The ones that were submitted today.
Well, they're submitted today, but there's also going to be some additional,
That's going to start by Friday at noon.
Yeah.
then go with the one that was
In
today.
theory, you're going with the documents that were submitted previously as well as those this afternoon and nothing else.
Go with the ones this afternoon. And then if there's additional trees offered or different configurations, we can mention that. But for
Yes.
the purposes of the public hearing and for the notification, and thank you very much, Jody, we'll say so. You'll say so as part of it.
I don't think we voted.
No, we didn't. In fact, you didn't move. Or did you?
Oh, I got
Make the motion.
partially.
Yeah,
through.
well,
I make the motion.
is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
6-0. We got two more items on. We're out of work session. Thank you all for
Thank you all very much.
sticking around. Appreciate it. The first is a board of review for, which I'll read in, the request of Erwin Iser, hope I pronounced that correctly, at 9 Blue Jay Way. All you Beatles fans out there. East Hampton, lots number 1, portion of lot 5, portion of lot 19, 20 through 29, 57 through 66, Suffolk County Tax Map 300-183-2-3.2. The work to be done is going to be clearing, pruning, and prepare shoulder areas on both sides of the roadway, starting at Buckskill Road, continuing east along Blue Jay Way for a distance of 529 linear feet. Paved with a minimum of compacted thickness of 1.5 inches of New York State Type 6 asphalt. And the bond is in the sum of $23,000. I've read the Board of Review. I move for its adoption. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Yes, 6-0. All right, the last thing before Sharon reads in the motion on Wayne Scott. This is not for the purposes of discussion. This is for the purposes of informing, okay? Because there are many things going on all of a sudden and all at once. Sounds like an mood. As you may know or should know, the public comment portion, the public hearing portion, which allows individuals to make comments, expired when, on Tuesday?
Monday, the 13th.
Monday. All right, so there's no more public comment permitted on the EIS. And so that's the first thing. But this motion, which we'll get into in a moment, allows an extension for involved agencies, because we haven't heard from all the involved agencies and they need a little more time, I think. But subsequent, so that's one recent development, is the closing of the public hearing. Second recent development is that the Suffolk County Planning Commission took up the Wayne Scott Commercial Center application, and there was discussion. They had a pretty fulsome discussion, I understand, but they have not issued their, is it called a report, Eric, or a recommendation, or an acceptance, whatever? After 5 years on the Suffolk County Planning Commission, I should know what it's called, but the actual formal document that either accepts or rejects, which are not the words they use, or accepts with condition. That document has not issued. It is expected to be issued any time now, maybe?
Yeah, we're not sure, but
we don't know, but so I know it's been reported about in at least one of the local papers, but until the Suffolk County Planning Commission issues that formal acceptance, rejection, or whatever it's called, there's nothing for us to do. So that's one thing to pay attention to. Second thing is, as many of you may know from watching TV last night, the Zoning Board of Appeals voted that what are they?
Application.
No. Thank you. Blanking on that. The special permit is indeed required at this time. And that was a unanimous decision. Well, the board, which is sitting right here, all said that they thought that the special permit should be applied now. But again, we don't have the formal resolution from the ZBA. But assuming that the formal resolution follows the vote or the consensus that was taken at the ZBA meeting last night, that will be coming down the road, also in relation to the Wayne Scott Commercial Center. And then finally, and this is where it really gets interesting, on March 14th, 2023, the United States Environmental Protection Agency announced the proposed national primary drinking water regulation for 6 PFAS, and then they list them all, which I'm not even going to try to read. And the EPA is requesting public comment on the proposed regulation. And similarly, today, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation issued I'll read the headline. DEC releases final ambient water quality guidance values for PFOA, PFAS, and 1.1,4 dioxin. In other words, these two agencies, one federal, one state, are looking at the standards for PFAS and other contaminants. And those are potentially, not saying they are, but potentially issues that may come up in relation to the Wayne Scott Commercial Center. So we have, as I say, 4 new things that are more balls in the air. And the only thing I have to say about it, and again, it's not for a conversation now, is stay tuned. And with that, Sharon, we have one final item on the motion on the agenda.
So we're creating an end date, but this, I guess we could have another one if people aren't getting all this
Well,
stuff
it's-
in time.
It's not people as in humans.
I know, I
It's
understand.
people as in agencies.
It's an agencies, I got it. I'll read that
On the
in.
resolution
Yeah, sure.
before, 2 questions. Who are the interested and involved agencies?
It's everyone that's copied on the reso.
He's copied on-
Yeah, DOT, Health Department, Planning Commission.
DOT is, you know, from what I understand, they've been in communication with our experts, our traffic experts, and presumably their comment is forthcoming. Okay. So this is to give them and any other agencies that, you know, need more time, that time.
The other question is, when these resolutions establish a date, a deadline date, and there's no time given on that date, does that imply that midnight is the final time?
I would say yes.
No,
It's normally 4 o'clock
Or
of
business
the
hours.
day.
But it's not stated here that it's 4 o'clock. So if somebody submits something at 6 o'clock,
Actually.
Well, it's only going to be from an involved.
Yeah, it's not gonna be public.
Not a member of the public,
Oh, no,
so.
4 p.m.
oh,
Very last line.
my mistake, sorry.
The DEC is probably not working at midnight still.
Yeah, right.
Of course they are.
Okay.
Go ahead.
In the matter of the application of Wayne Scott Commercial Center preliminary subdivision, tax map number 300-192-2-6.2 to 6.7. This is to extend the period for comments from interested and involved agents. And I'm just going to read the last paragraph, I think. So now and therefore, be it resolved in the interest of developing a complete environmental record for clarity and expediency, the comment period for interested and involved agencies only will be extended to close on March 31st, 2023, with all comments from such agencies received by the planning board on or before 4 p.m. on March 31st, 2023. I've read this and moved for its adoption.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Passed, 6-0. Okay, and again, look, all of you were very, very kind to me, and you all sent me little emails and phone calls and whatnot, and I really appreciate it. I really do. It's, surgery sucks. Let me say that as a.
But when it's successful, it's
When
great.
it's successful and I'm here and able to eat my little cashews and look at those butterfingers. Let me get them away from me.
Those butterfingers are a thing of the
They
past.
certainly are. But carrots, we love carrots. So, no, but thank you all very much. It meant a lot to me and definitely helped my recuperation, which is ongoing. So, and will be until.
And I heard it went from triple to quadruple.
Yeah, listen, I signed one piece of paper and I came out with another. Really something. Yeah. It is. Medicine is amazing. Let me tell you something. You know, I'm a lawyer and lawyers are, well, what we do is the most important thing in the world. They roll you into that operating room with that gurney. But I know it's so important anymore.
They are gods.
Yeah, they certainly are. They certainly are. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? When's our next meeting? We have one next week?
Yes,
I'll be here.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
That's 6-0.